All right, welcome back, everybody. This next session, we're going to be talking with a very busy guy, Kristof Ringleff, who is the CEO and CTO of ExtDN and the founder and lead developer for phpstand. He's an extension provider who's trusted by agencies and merchants in more than 160 countries. He's been coding Magento since its first release and has developed 15 plus free and commercial extensions to simplify administration, save time, and money when using Magento. phpstand is a founding member of ExtDN, a network of like-minded extension developers to make it easier for merchants and agencies alike to find great extensions for their projects. Kristof is a certified Magento Developer Plus and enjoys contributing to community discussions, mostly via Twitter and Magento Stack Exchange. He runs the local media group in Auckland, New Zealand. Please welcome to the stage, Kristof Ringleff.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for that introduction. I think we're live now. So unfortunately, I'm unable to see you all in person in New York. Would be great to join you all, but instead, I'm coming to you live from the future today. A good Saturday morning from New Zealand. Isn't the internet a great thing? And thanks you all for joining my presentation. Copy paste to better quality extension with ExtDN. I'd like to start at the end. What actually is ExtDN? You might have paid attention in the introduction. It's really all in the name, Extension Developer Network. And I like to focus on the network aspect. So it's really like-minded extension developers coming together, working on aspects that will benefit the whole Magento ecosystem. At this stage, you might go, yeah, that's all a very, very fancy way of saying you have a Slack channel, Kristof. So what's in it really for you? Well, to answer that question, I'd like to go back to some of the origins of ExtDN. So a few years back, I got feedback from a customer, and I'm just paraphrasing here. Hey, I had such a great experience with phpstand. That was awesome. Extension worked first time. Unfortunately, 90% of the time, it's actually pretty bad. So at first I was sort of like doing my victory dance and saying, hey, Kristof, well done. You know, you're doing good. Your competitors are not doing so good. Surely that's a good thing. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought maybe this is not so good after all. If my experience is a 1 out of 10 experience, that means that all the other times it's actually not so great. And if we sum this up, this leads to pretty awful average for the industry I'm part of as well. So if you for example, take takeaways, if you order takeaways and 9 times out of 10, the food is actually not that great, what would that do for the takeaway industry? Would you be more inclined or less inclined? So that's really where ExtDN is coming in, where we sort of try to bring this number up for the industry as a whole. And there's really 2 ways that we are aiming to do that. First of all, we want to find and elevate those 5-star providers and give them a way to sort of shine brighter in the overall industry. And then we want to raise the bar of the industry as a whole. So if you're working with Magento, either as a developer at an agency or a merchant, or you're working at an extension development company as an extension provider, working with Magento means that you're writing extension. So basically, we're all doing the same thing, just with a different audience and a different sort of way of delivering the project. But that means we can all learn from each other. And we as extension developers, we have a different view. So we can change certain aspects, and other people hopefully can do the same. In the past, ExtDN, we have created a few white papers, and you may have seen us distributing those at events as different flyers for you to take home and take a look, and they're also available on our website. But I'm here today to show you how you can turn some of those learnings into concrete actions to make it easier to apply those to your projects. And not any actions, more specifically, GitHub Actions. If you haven't heard so far, GitHub has launched GitHub Actions mid to end last year. They're also free to open source, and you get 2,000 minutes with any account, so you can run a continuous integration on your own repositories. It's similar to what people might have used Travis for. One of the cool things that GitHub Actions can do is it integrates well with Docker images. But in my mind, the killer feature of what makes GitHub Actions great is you can easily reuse and share those actions, so it becomes like an open source collaboration on DevOps. I quickly wanted to shout out at this stage, I normally would have introduced Sveta from MaxBS to take through to the rest of the presentation. Unfortunately, she's based in southern Israel, and the situation there is currently pretty dire with rockets flying over her city. So she sends her apologies, and stay safe, Sveta. So with that, I'm pleased to announce that ExtDN has created a few ExtDN GitHub Actions, which we're happy to share with the community. Today, I'm introducing 4 of those. First one will be covering the Magento 2 coding standard, phpstand, running integration tests, and last but not least, Magento 2 performance smoke test. I'm going to be going through all those 4, quickly show you what they do, why they're good to use, and how you can actually use them in your project. First up is the Magento 2 coding standard. You might have heard the use of the coding standard before. It is really the summary of all the different coding standards that were floating around in the Magento ecosystem prior. So we had the marketplace, the EQP, the coding standard that was embedded into the code base itself. So this is really now the summary, combining all the elements and one to use for everyone going forward. The coding standard itself runs on a tool which is PHP Code Sniffer, and the different rules are grouped into different severity levels. The top one is severity 10, and they're really critical issues, so that's something you really need to look into. And then it sort of steps down in levels where it goes to possible security issues, then more Magenta specific issues. So for example, if you try to load something in a for each loop, that might be flagged. And then the further down severity levels, the less severe it obviously becomes. So why would we want to have this coding standard running? Well, overall, the idea of applying a coding standard is that you obviously end up with less bugs in your code. If you all settle on the same consistent style, it should also make code reviews a lot easier, because the changes in code only contain the changes in logic rather than someone having a different view of how a code should look. And overall, that should result in better code that becomes more maintainable in the long term. I did want to shout out at this stage to say that the Magento marketplace does check for the Magento 2 coding standard, but I think in the past there has been a misconception of how much of the coding standard it checks. So at this stage, it really only enforces severity 10 issues. So the rest of the coding standard is more like a FYI. So it is only a small subset that really is enforced on marketplace extensions. We from ExtDN are hopeful that we can push this a little bit further down the severity level in the future. So how do you actually use it? Well, we start off by copy and pasting this snippet of code, and you create a YAML file in this particular folder, which is the .github workflows folder, and any YAML file that GitHub finds is turned into a GitHub Actions. So by pasting this small piece of code in there, commit this to your repository, and from then on out, any push or pull request on your GitHub repository will run the Magento 2 coding standard check. How does this look? Well, after the action has run, you can head to the GitHub UI, and under the actions for the repository, you will see the result of the run. You can click into the actual results, and in this case, it's just an example of where something gets highlighted by the coding standard check for you to look into. And that's really all there's to it, to the ExtDN M2 coding standard action. And we move on to the next one, which is Magenta phpstand. For those of you that haven't heard of phpstand, I'd like to call it a next generation code static code analyzer. So in comparison to Code Sniffer, that looks just at codes in small isolations, phpstand can look at the code and actually understands what the code is meant to do. And through that, it can find a whole different range of issues that PHP Code Sniffer by itself can't find. So brings up issues like inexisting classes, methods, wrong parameter counts, and unused variables. One thing to note here, our phpstand configuration and settings is using the same that Magenta 2 is using, and that gives us additional plugins. So for example, if you're using the magic getters and setters on the Magenta 2 data object, phpstand will be able to understand that this is valid code. So the why of phpstand, the tool in my mind is a good quick win really, as in for not a lot of effort. By just running the tool, you get a whole range of output, which is very valuable in terms of checking and to look into. So you may be able to get away with writing less tests overall. Which brings us to the how. How can you apply this to your own repository? Well, we again start out with copy and pasting to a new file in the workflows folder, and you will see at the bottom it mentions the composer name. So that is really the only configuration that you will have to change for your own module. So you adjust the composer name and you push something to your repository and create a pull request, and this will be running from then on out automatically for you to take a look at. And here's another example of how this looks if you get to a failure. So again, on the GitHub UI, under Actions, you can click into the phpstand results, and it will give you the output of, in this case, a file where we're calling a method which is not there. So obviously something for you to look into, as that is a very likely bug. Which brings us to the new GitHub action number 3, which is running integration test. So the ExtDN action, what does it do? First of all, it starts off with a composer installation of the module in the given Magenta version. So that in and of itself is already a good check to make sure that it's actually installable. And the way we've threaded the installation to the setup of Magento, it runs the installation prior to the setup install command. And that brings up a whole range of different set of issues that might not come about if you install Magenta first and then extension second. And that is relevant for the ordering of the database installation commands, which if you run a Magenta 2 migration, that becomes relevant. And then after all that, it runs the actual integration tests that have been bundled with the extension itself. Why bother with Magenta 2 integration tests? Well, in my mind, integration tests offer a really good balance between effort and result. So if you're only starting out with writing tests, these are probably the best ones to tackle, as in with a small amount of code, a small amount of tests, you can cover a lot of ground. And you can configure the GitHub Actions to, for example, avoid merging to the production branch unless it passed all the integration tests. So it really is a good point to start with your own integration, continuous integration for M2 projects. How do you make use of all this goodness? Well, again, you start with copy and pasting into a new file, which is the integration YAML file, but can be named anyway. In this case, the snippet that I've shown here is in real life a whole lot longer, but you can find it on our repository. You copy and paste the whole thing. There's a few variables at the bottom. Again, sort of you have to set the composer name of the module name itself, and then you have to write your first integration test for it to be running. And from then on out, anything you push to your repository, creating pull requests, this will run automatically without any further ado. Again, a quick example of how this looks. If you have a failure, it gives you at the bottom the output from the PHP unit results. All right, moving on to number 4, the Magenta 2 performance smoke test. What does it do? At this stage, this is our first foray into performance testing, so we've picked a page which will most likely exhibit an issue, and we picked the category page. Why the category page? Well, in the past, that has been a good candidate where performance issues have shown themselves. So for example, if you have an issue with loading a single product, if you have a category page with lots of product, that will obviously snowball and a whole lot worse. So this test really does a comparison. So we run Blackfire profiling on the category page, we do an installation of the new code, and then we run the Blackfire profiling once more, and then we compare these two results. And if those are either 25% slower overall, it uses 25% more memory, or it uses 25% more SQL queries, that will fail. Just to note, this threshold of 25% is configurable in the Magenta 2 GitHub action. That's just the number I picked based on seeing that a normal before and after run sort of already has a variability of 5 to 10% on the GitHub action timing wise. So that might be just before, so the normal baseline. And then I wanted to give a small amount of headroom for an extension to actually do something. But again, configure it to your needs. Then the question of why, that hopefully is self-explanatory for this one. You really don't want to install any slow extensions that give a big hit on your store, and it gives you an opportunity to recheck your code for performance issues. Which again leads us to the how, and hopefully by number 4 you sort of discover the pattern of how this all works. You copy and paste the code into a new YAML file, which is in the workflows folder. Again, this one is a whole lot longer than what I'm showing here, so head over to our repository to pick the complete code. You again have to set a few environment variables to the naming of your extension itself. And in this case, because we're using Blackfire to run the actual profiling and running the comparison, you do need to use your Blackfire credentials, and you set them up as GitHub secrets for it to run. And from then on out, any push or pull request to your repository will run this automatically in the background. And how does that look if we install something that's not so good? Well, again, you get the failure case, and it adds a small summary of the results. So in this case, I actually just added a sleep command into every page, and you will notice that that jumps up in the time needed for the page to render. And we also link to the Blackfire comparison. So if you drill into that, it will tell you exactly where the bad example is actually happening. All right, and that brings me to hopefully the end of my talk. So we hope the ExtDN GitHub Actions I've shown here are useful to you, and we hope they're a great way to maintain the code quality of your repository. We're trying to keep it easy to implement, so just copy and paste, and you start with your own continuous integration. It offers an easy way to spot major performance issues. And last but not least, I do want to say in closing, ExtDN does not at all endorse copy and pasting extensions code itself. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the Q&A aspect of this presentation. So please do let me know if there's any questions I can answer.
Phenomenal job, Kristof, and thank you so much for that. That was a great presentation. I know I took away a lot from there. I'm looking at the Q&A feed, and I don't see a whole lot of questions. What I see is a whole lot of praise and gratitude for the information. Now is the time, folks. If you have a question for Kristof, please drop it in the Q&A or the chat. We've been jogging back and forth between the two. I see.
Well, if there's any more general questions on ExtDN, I'm more than happy to take those as well. Or the GitHub Actions.
Here's
go ahead.
I've got a question from Laura Falco. Would you say this is a replacement for something like Captain Hook?
So if you've been using Captain Hook so far, awesome. I wouldn't see it as a replacement. Captain Hook to me is probably more local, whereas GitHub Actions run centrally. So I think it's possible to configure GitHub Actions to run Captain Hook configured tools. So I personally actually use Captain Hook for my local environment, and then centrally on something like GitHub, that's where GitHub Actions come in. And the beauty of these GitHub Actions is you can mix and match them. So if you're using this, you can use that on top of it. And so, for example, something like the performance profiling, that actually took quite a bit of time to get the setup right. So you may not have that locally, and it takes a bit of time to run. So offload anything to a different machine, I think, is always a good thing.
Very cool, and thank you for that, Kristof. Thanks for the question, Laura. Kristof, can you hit us with your Twitter handle? Because I know you like to interact on Twitter. I want to tag you in a couple of things myself.
So it's @FumanNZ.
Got it.
Otherwise, the ExtDN handle is perfect as well.
Wonderful. All right, last calls for Q&A here. Anyone else have anything else for Kristof before we let him go?
So I'll be hanging around the ExtDN booth as well. So if you want to meet me through there, I'll have a few slots available if you want to have a quick chat about anything in private or want to follow up. I'm more than happy to take those.
Fantastic, and I love that you said that. We want to plug all of our sponsor booths. Please get out there and give your sponsors some love. They'll be glad to see you. We're going to go ahead and take a very short break, and then we'll start our next session directly. Thank you so much.